Making the body as comfortable as it can be in this moment. There may be some discomfort, there may be some pain in the body. So just adjust your position to be as comfortable as you can be. Become aware of the physical presence of this unit, this body that we inhabit for this lifetime. Notice the way we experience this body through the 5 senses, through the sense of touch, body seated on the mat or perhaps the chair or bed, feeling the contact between the body and the clothing, the sense of touch. There may be an aroma in the room. Perhaps you've just finished eating. There may be taste still on the tongue. Your eyes may be closed. There may be some inner sight. And you may be hearing and listening to different sounds within the room you're in, or perhaps out in the distance. Through the senses, experience this body and the apparent solidness of the body. Sensations, whether they be comfortable or uncomfortable. You may sense movement. The lungs expanding and contracting with each breath. Perhaps you can feel the heart beating. There may be heat or cold. Notice how we experience this body through the senses. And then begin to perceive a sense of presence that is not physical. Allowing an open, aware sense of presence, which includes the body, but is not limited to the body. a sense of beingness, alive presence. Aware presence. And in this open, aware presence, there's no sense of the subject, object relationship. And we can simply allow this sense of being, aware presence to be there, even as we end this short meditation. Perhaps that will carry on. One thing that is unchanging. Namaste. So perhaps this is a perfect place to begin, which of course is also the perfect place to end, where resting in this, or as this open, aware presence, as awareness itself, is actually our highest state of being. And Terry and I were talking about this a little bit today, where initially when one begins to practice meditation, and you'll hear an instructor guiding to become aware of and to develop the ability to witness, to observe in a non-judgmental way, so that the inner critic is, for the large part, silent. And this is quite often a first step, but where we're actually pointing with that direction is beyond it. It's who often in that meditation, one would then take up the position of being the witness. However, in the absolute experience of open, aware presence, which is the witnessing, there's nobody witnessing because nobody is home. Because it is simply dropping into that no thingness, the open, aware presence, where there is no mental comment, or if there is, it's distantly in the background. It's certainly not in the foreground, and it's not attached to or part of the open aware, the experience of open aware presence. It is that sense of being without the experiencer. So it's not an object-subject relationship. It's not I, the meditator, witnessing my thoughts arising. This is a stage that we go through, developing that aspect of stepping back from thought, stepping back from the inner critic, stepping back from, the machinations of the mind. However, ultimately, it's resting as the open, aware presence. And this can be very much misunderstood. And I know it was here initially, and I'm sure it was for all of us. And very often it's not misunderstood. So it is misunderstood to the point where we miss the point. We miss that aspect of it's not I, Soraya, or I, Sebastian, or I, whoever, who awakens and becomes the witness and is the presence. The sense of person disappears into the no thingness, and there is simply an experience of open aware presence, which is quite different. And in that open aware presence, everything is still happening, but there is nobody there to comment, to judge, almost to observe. Nobody there. So it's a very different understanding. Do you want to share a little on that, too?
Yeah, it's how the mind, or whatever you like to call it, creates the sense of separation. Because whilst the judging and the commentary is going on, if any of that is going on, that is the interaction, the illusory interaction between me and that. So when that dies away, the separation also dies away with it. The thing is, it's not possible to bring that about, because any attempt to create silence in that whole automation is done by the automation itself. So understanding has different levels. Pure witnessing comes about as a kind of understanding, which is nobody understanding anything, but it comes as an understanding of the whole being, which kind of flicks that switch and turns off the interaction between this object and those objects. The interaction between me and that quietens down to the point where I disappear, and there is only that sense of being, which is the pure observer, the observer which is everything, which is not separate from the observed.
And this is when very often we've all read about stories about, for instance, people going and sitting in the presence and having darshan, it's called darshan, with a master. And even Ramana Maharshi, the most powerful teaching he did was people just having darshan, being in his presence. And because he had, had dropped into this sense of being, this sense of no mind, this sense of at one, all one, others would then, that vibration, that resonance would then affect anyone else in that field. And you may have even felt it in that meditation towards the end. We bring ourselves back so that we can have satsang, but actually we could just rest there. And it's a very delicious experience when mind stops and there is simply presence and not the experience of me, the separate person, having the experience. So I thought we'd open with that and just check in with you, and let's have a little discussion around that and the understanding, because this understanding again is a very important step, that we don't misunderstand that we're an object facing other objects or a subject facing other objects, that ultimately it is all one. So everyone's being thrown in the deep end. Would anyone like to share their feelings around that?
I think for me, two things come to mind. I mean, what you said about how, how do I get to a point of taking myself out of the equation when I'm putting myself in there to become aware of my awareness, to then there's no me being aware of my awareness, but to get there is a step to begin with, where you are acknowledging yourself as being separate. And I suppose maybe it's just trusting that if one does that, then if one goes through that process, then one will actually vanish for a moment.
And it can happen quite spontaneously, Sebastian. Initially, like in that little meditation, first of all, we became aware that we have a body. But in that, the way that was presented, it's acknowledging we have a body, we're not the body. And the very easy way to acknowledge that is, if I can be aware of something, then I'm not that, am I? So that initial step of acknowledging, if I'm aware of a body, then I'm not that. So then we see the body as this separate envelope, this cloak, perhaps, that's inhabited by the open, aware presence that we are, the I that I am. So first of all, we acknowledge that by noticing the way we ultimately attach to this as being me is through the five senses. Yeah. Because I can feel this body. So, and it feels like it's me. Yeah. And I can see this hand and it looks like it's attached to what feels like it's me. But of course, we can do the opposite as well. We can look at this hand and go, am I this hand? Well, no, I'm not this hand, and etc., etc. So going through that process first of understanding And just simply knowing without a doubt that I am not this body, I have a body. That's probably the first step. And then in meditation, just watching the play initially of the five senses and how the recognition and the constant attaching comes through the five senses of sight, of hearing, of touch, etc., taste and smell. And then as we drop back and notice mind, we don't have to drop back very far to notice mind, and the thought process that's going on, again, we can, if we are witnessing something, we are not that. I can witness the thought process, so I'm not my thoughts. So again, that takes us that little step backwards again from being this body mind. What has happened throughout our lifetime, since from the moment of birth almost, is that we're given a name, we're told, you're a little Sebastian, and then as we grow, Sebastian's like this, Sebastian's like that, etc. So we're developed and we're programmed by our parents, we're programmed by our schools, we're programmed by the media, etc. And we lose very quickly, around about the age of 2, I think, we lose that sense of I am everything. But when you look at a little baby and they're just, they're lying there and they're waving their arm, and then after a while they discover that there's a hand and they realize it's attached to them. And then they learn to reach for something. And you watch that, I'm watching my little new granddaughter at the moment. And when she first started to reach for something, it was like, oh, that's attached here and I can get that, that, because initially they're just, I am everything. They're in that beautiful, beautiful, open, aware, present state. Slowly that degrades, and of course it has to, so that we can function in this worldly plane. It's necessary. But then we notice in the meditation, I can observe my thoughts. So I'm not my thoughts. So then that step is I, and very often that I is I, Soraya, I, Sebastian, I, Terry, I, the personality, am watching my thoughts. That's the first stage, which you just acknowledged then, Sebastian, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah.
And then it's like a melting starts to happen. A melting of, and this can be done through self-inquiry or just continuing to step back from having any opinion of the thoughts. Because as soon as judgment comes, it must be the separate self, mustn't it? It must be the egoic self, because life is unfolding and the I am presence is not judging that. It's not making it right or wrong. It's only when we take a standpoint, and whatever standpoint that is, which is the standpoint that's developed from all the programs that we're running, from all the data that's inputted, from 2 years old or before. And then our standpoint will come from that data. And from that standpoint, we judge the thoughts. We can't help it. It's happening. If the separate self's there, there's some sort of comment on the thoughts. But the further we melt away from having any judgment, having any inclination, any preference, letting go of any craving, letting go of any aversion to something, we start to recognize that little step back, that's the separate self, the egoic self, that's actually commenting on what it's observing. So then we see that in play, yeah? And then once we see that and start to melt back from that, ultimately what will happen is you will just melt. I say melt because that's how it feels for me. It's like everything just melts away, and there's just this almost like a nothingness, just an open, aware presence of, there's still, there's still everything going on in the world, but there's nothing going on here. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I think
anything?
a good word for to describe this is innocence. And it's something which is very much misunderstood. The word innocence means incapable of harming or being harmed, if you take it back into the innocentus or whatever it is, the Latin or the Greek. And there's a couple of lines from a poem. I don't know which poem it is, but it's just sprung to mind. It's innocence holds the hand of anger smiling, steps lightly through confusion. The way it does that is that it's not in a state of reactivity. It's not in a state of judgment. It's just seeing everything as it is.
Can you repeat that one more time so it can sink?
The poem. Yeah, innocence holds the hand of anger smiling, steps lightly through confusion. And that state of innocence is a state of unable to be harmed, because there's nothing there to harm, and it's an unable to harm because, again, there's nothing there to harm.
Like the little child.
When it comes also back to that saying, love and do what you will, because in that state of love, which is all accepting, all embracing, there's no possibility of doing anything wrong. So do what you will. But in that state of love, do what you will. And everything is okay in that state. From that, coming from that state of love. And love is another word for what we're talking about. Pure witnessing, because pure witnessing is a state of completely all-embracing openness. Nothing wrong at all with anything. And again, for that to happen, there has to be no interaction on a mental level.
And that's the true awakening of the heart. Often people, a lot of the work that I've done in the last few years, I call it, awakening hearts. And that's got nothing to do with, loving relationships or loving this or loving that on that human level. It's when the heart is fully awakened, when there is an innocence there, no harm can be done. And it would be impossible, because that wouldn't even enter the consciousness to harm or to hurt. So, very beautiful. Good question. Does that help, Sebastian?
Yes. And actually, what you just said there at the end, I think is, I can relate that in a certain way, because when you were doing the meditation, I found that like separating off from the body was great, but then actually moving into a place of not being aware of aware, it was almost like I felt myself sort of saying, well, hang on, I need to experience this. I need to come back, because it's actually a bit unsettling to just be with nothing. But as you say that about the heart, I could see that actually if one moved into that, it would actually maybe not draw one back into be feeling ungrounded at there's nothing here.
But initially, when you start to experience this state, and for lack of a better word, this open, aware presence, this no thingness, this deep peace, actually. Most people I've spoken to, when they first experience this, they're terrified because it's like a death.
Well, that was the word that came. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a death because there's no place for the ego there. There's no place for Soraya or Terry or Sebastian or anyone else. It literally is like a death to the ego, and it literally is. And it's like, you know, jumping off the cliff into total trust, total emptiness. And in that emptiness, though, if we can be brave enough there, because it takes quite a lot of courage, actually, initially, there's just deep peace.
I think that there's a beautiful passage. I don't know where it is exactly, but it's in the Gospel of St. Matthew. Again, I don't know where this comes from, but Jesus says, he's quoted as saying, when he first discovers this, he will be deeply troubled. And that's what he's talking about, that emptiness.
Because we cling to, you know, that I know, that we cling to that need to know, we cling to that having a standpoint, being right, achieving it, getting it. But here it's all, you know, that's why often in the non-dual world, that I totally get why we often say it's the great undoing. It's not that we have to do anything, it's we have to let go of doing anything. And yeah, it's like a free fall. But really, really great inquiry, really, really great inquiry. And so important and so misunderstood. I know, because myself for years, even though I was, you know, practicing and doing meditation, until you get that and get it, you don't. And it's so subtle, but yet it's huge. Yeah. Paulette, did you have anything to share?
No. I mean, when you were talking just now with Sebastian and this place, and Seba was talking about, you know, the emptiness or the death that you were talking about, this the word that came to me is this limitless space where there is no holding. And just I know from my work how difficult it is to even contemplate that, besides going there, and the huge movement that there is between that place where you experience limitless space and over here, which could be the Great Mother or the divine, or that's waiting. But it's so hard to know that in this limitless space, which is terrifying.
We're so used to boundaries that define things for us, you know, and we've got those boundaries to our that define, you know, who I am in the world, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and to just blow all that out of the water and
so hard
none of that.
Yeah. I'm finding at the moment excuse me, I'm preparing something for something, and I was doing the same thing last year. And this time last year I was so organized. I had, you know, each section of it organized so that I would know what followed what. And I am observing myself this year as I'm 2 weeks away, and the shape and the form are not yet clear. And I'm kind of trying to accompany myself to say, you know, to really trust this, stepping into this at this level. yeah. So
That's great.
Mm.
I love
It's-
that. I rarely plan workshops or anything anymore. And even
yeah,
often when we go on stage, we don't know what we're going to sing next. It's really
I know.
beautiful because it cannot, I mean, obviously you've got to have some sort of basic outline just before you walk on, but within that,
Yeah.
to have that very fluid and you know, easily, you know, spontaneously rearranged, but to have something set in stone, and then that often sets us up for great stress, because if it doesn't go to plan, there's this sense that the separate self has that it's failed and it's etc. So it really is, you know, the ego setting itself up for disaster,
Absolutely.
but yet trying to control something that's absolutely uncontrollable anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
No wonder there's so much, so many mental health issues and so much anxiety and depression, and that sense of failure is so common, because all through schooling, you know, and training in universities, it's very much about having your data right, having your statistics right, having all your ducks in a row, and having a plan, and you know, having a 5-year plan and having a 10-year plan. and and of course that's so limiting, so limiting.
But it's seen by the separate self as being safe. The safety is in that knowing.
Paradox, it's a paradox, isn't it?
It's a paradox. It's
Yeah,
a paradox.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.